And so we have the Browns next. So they were the hype of last year. I believe they were like 9-1 to win the Super Bowl. They were the third highest favorite to win the Super Bowl. Everyone's loving them. In fact, I remember I had a fantasy draft and someone was like, "Oh, are you betting the Browns to win the Super Bowl?" I said no. And the guy asked me, I was shocked. And I was like, really, the Browns? But I actually think they have a good chance to rebound this year and maybe make the playoffs. I'm curious to hear your opinion on them.
Yeah, I think it's funny that everyone last year was like, hey, the Browns are going to be Super Bowl contenders, because I never bought into that hype. I thought they were going to be like the Dream Team Eagles. They added a bunch of these big name players and, it was going to take time for them to put it all together. And that's exactly what happened. And granted, part of the problem was Coach Freddie Kitchens. I mean, he was just completely overmatched. And I understand why the Browns hired him, but it just turned out to be a disaster. But this year, the Browns look a lot better on paper. I think their biggest weakness last year was the offensive line, particularly at the tackle spots. They'd given up Kevin Zeitler in a trade for, I believe, Olivier Vernon. They had two big trades with the Giants last offseason, so it's hard to keep track. But they lost him. He's one of the best guards in the league. And then they had nothing at tackle, really. But they've fixed tackle this offseason. They drafted Jedrick Wills and signed Jack Conklin. So I think they're already better there. Baker Mayfield should be better protected, and he struggled immensely last year when under pressure. So I think that's huge for them. They added a middle-of-the-field weapon in Austin Hooper. I know he's probably not as good as his deal indicates, but I still like him as just kind of a solid, steady producer who should be a good third overall weapon between Beckham, Landry, and himself. And then you look at the running game and having Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and that's just a no-brainer solid thing. And an underrated move, they picked up Andy Janovich, fullback from Denver. I love fullbacks, and Janovich is one of the better ones in the league. So I think if they use more of a power run game with Chubb and Janovich on the field, and even Kareem Hunt, if they put them on the field together, it's going to be hard to stop that and open things up for Mayfield a bit. Defense is still a little bit of a work in progress for the Browns. I think they've done well to upgrade some parts of their team. I think they have a star at every level of their defense between Myles Garrett on the defensive line, Denzel Ward in the secondary. And then I thought Mack Wilson was fantastic last year as a rookie. I know he was a fifth-round pick, but he was frequently mocked in the first round. At times he fell due to character concerns. So I think Cleveland should improve there as the season goes along. And they have some talent there. But, again, it's all going to boil down to coaching. I don't know how Kevin Stefanski is going to do in his first year. We'll see what happens. He did well with the Vikings offense, and the Browns front office seems to think that he has the right approach for them. So I'll believe them for now, but I tend to doubt the Browns organization a bit. So I'm a little bit wary of this team, but I do think they're better off than they were last year when people were predicting them to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's funny how there's no hype with the Browns at all right now, like none. And there was so much hype last year when I think it's clear and like it's very obvious that this Browns team is better than last year's version. When everyone was hyping them to get to the Super Bowl, I was like, but they have Greg Robinson left tackle. Like, how's that going to happen? The tackles were horrible last year, and now they're going to be so much better, assuming Jedrick Wills doesn't completely bust. I think the Browns tackles are going to be so much better, and their offense is going to be improved as a result. And they have Austin Hooper, as you said, and this question from Zorro, what do you think about Austin Hooper? Like you said, I think he was a little overpaid, but he's definitely going to be an upgrade of what they had at tight end. So he's definitely going to help. We'll see about Jarvis Landry's health. I don't know if he's 100%, but you got to think at some point during the year he will be healthy. Their defense should be better. They have two young corners who should improve. Greedy Williams will not be a rookie again. They added Grant Delpit, another LSU player to safety, and another LSU player, Jacob Phillips, to linebacker. So I like their defense getting better. And people forget that Myles Garrett was suspended at the end of the year last year. The Browns were in the playoff mix. In fact, I believe it was week 13. They had a big game against the Steelers in Pittsburgh, I believe. And the Browns needed to win that game to kind of get into the playoff mix. I think they would have improved to 6-6 had they beaten the Steelers. But Myles Garrett was not available for that game because the incident with Mason Rudolph's helmet. So Garrett's going to be back next year. He's been reinstated. He's not going to miss any action. He's going to play week 1. I think having Myles Garrett the entire year with an improved defense, it should be improved defense, I think it will be huge. And I think the Browns have a good chance to make the playoffs this year. I have them at 10-6 on the site. Wouldn't surprise me if they're even 11-5. So I'm pretty bullish on this team.
Yeah, I could definitely see a 10-6 team here. I'm a little bit less bullish on them. Again, from my perspective, it's just the coaching. I tend not to invest in coaches I'm uncertain about anymore after being burned on that occasionally. So I see them probably as an 8-8 team right now, but I think that's more indicative of their floor. I could definitely see them getting to double-digit wins, and I think ultimately they may have a winning record. So it'll be interesting to see how they do, but at the end of the day, I don't think anything can really be worse than what Freddie Kitchens provided the team as coach last year.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We'll see about Stefanski with the shortened off season. But yeah, you'll definitely be better than Kitchens. Kenny's trolling, by the way. He's saying that Cam Newton is better than Tom Brady for weird reasons. He says we should be canceled because we like fullbacks. Thanks for the input, Kenny.
Kenny, you're the man, dude.
Looking for our next episode. Look forward to our next episode. All right, we have the Bengals left in this division, so let's talk about them. They were the worst team in the NFL last year. They had the number 1 overall pick, but I have a feeling they won't be the worst team in the NFL this year. What are your thoughts on them?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be the worst team either. I think if you look at them last year, they had some solid pieces. They had some decent receivers on offense. Andy Dalton isn't the worst quarterback in the league. He's better served as a top backup at this point in his career. But he's not the worst. The problem really was their offensive line. They just couldn't block for really anyone. The running game couldn't get going as a result. And their defense had enough holes, especially in the secondary, that could be exploited. But they've fixed their big problems this year. And I know a lot of people will point to Joe Burrow as being the franchise savior whenever depending on how the Bengals do this year, if they look much better than they did last year, people will point to Burrow. But I actually think it's going to be a combination of other factors that are going to lead to that. I think Burrow's going to have sort of an up and down rookie season. He was prolific in his final year of college, but he really was a one-year wonder as a starter. Before last year, when he accounted for 60 passing touchdowns, in 2018, he completed 58% of his passes for under 3,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. So he was like steady quarterback, really solid, but he wasn't looking like the number 1 overall pick. So I think he may take time to develop away from Joe Brady. That's nothing against Burrow. I just think he may not come in right away and be a big-time difference maker. I think the presence of A.J. Green, if he can stay healthy, will be huge. The return of Jonah Williams, who missed his rookie season due to an injury, is also going to be huge for that offensive line. They were without Cordy Glenn, who we've mentioned, I think, on like 30 of our 40 podcasts that we've done together.
Like every episode.
It's remarkable how frequently we mention Cordy Glenn, but he was out for all but I believe 6 games last year. When he played, the Bengals were significantly better. He's a free agent now, and no one signed him yet. Someone should, because he's a solid tackle. But I think Jonah Williams has obviously more long-term upside than him at this point, and should hopefully give them a steady player at left tackle, improve the blocking if he can stay healthy. I don't love the rest of their offensive line. I don't think they did particularly a lot to upgrade it. I think they should have done more, especially in a tackle-heavy class. Not to draft one into the 6th round was questionable. But I can forgive them for that a bit. I think the biggest area they've improved, though, is on defense. They actually spent a lot of money. The Bengals rarely sign players in free agency for big money, but they went out and added DJ Reader from the Texans, play nose tackle, and they added a couple of cornerbacks from Minnesota, Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander. Waynes has had an up and down career, and Alexander's been good in the slot. So I think those were 2 solid signings. Hopefully Waynes pans out for them, but pairing them with William Jackson, a 2016 first-round pick, should give them a good cornerback trio. And all of a sudden, that secondary looks strong when you look at Jesse Bates back there and Sean Williams, who's been a steady starter, and then Von Bell, who they brought over from the Saints. So they've got depth and talent there. I think they're still a little bit weaker at the linebacker position, but they drafted Logan Wilson, who I liked. He played at Wyoming. And they have Jermaine Pratt, another player who I liked entering his second year. So it'll be interesting to see how they do at linebacker. But I think linebacker and offensive line are their two big weaknesses. But overall, I think they have a lot more talent than people are giving them credit for. And I could see them approaching the 8-8 mark. I think they come up a bit short, but it shouldn't surprise anyone to see them do much better than they did last year and finish kind of middle of the pack.
Yeah, you mentioned their two weaknesses, and they're both going to be better this year than they were last year. Because you mentioned Jonah Williams is coming back. We don't know how good he's going to be, but he was a top pick in the draft last year, so he can't be that bad. And I think that with Cordy Glenn gone, maybe with Jonah Williams not having much experience, maybe he and Cordy Glenn kind of cancel each other out, because Glenn, while he did improve the offensive line when he came back last year, he wasn't 100%. So I think that Jonah Williams might equal what Cordy Glenn did in his first year. And if that's the case, then it's going to be good for the Bengals, because the Bengals improved when Cordy Glenn came back at the end of the year. That they won their games when he was there. So I think that's going to be nice. And you mentioned the linebackers they added. So the linebacker is probably the worst unit on their defense, but it will be better than it was last year. And they really wanted to upgrade it because of what Lamar Jackson did to them in the second game. It was just an embarrassing blowout. So it's going to them to do that. Offensively, Joe Burrow, like you said, he's going to have some inconsistency. He's going to have some great moments, and he's going to have some struggles, as you might expect from a rookie. But I love his potential long term. I think he's going to be a great quarterback. It just might take a little bit of time with that offensive line, maybe in a second or third year. Actually, next year, if they fix the offensive line, I can see the Bengals getting to the playoffs. This year, there's going to be inconsistency, but at least he's going to have AJ Green back, presumably. Like, Green missed all of last year. He didn't play a single snap. Having AJ Green as the number one receiver, even if he's in his 30s now, will be huge for him. Tyler Boyd, we've seen play well as a number two, not so much as number one. So having Tyler Boyd back as a number two receiver, I think is enormous as well. We saw Auden Tate play well at times, so like him as the number three receiver, I think is pretty good. And then they drafted T. Higgins in the second round. I'm not a huge fan of Higgins, but I still think he can maybe contribute. And then I love Joe Mixon. He improved when Cordy Glenn came back, so I expect him to do well. So I like the direction the Bengals are going in. They just have the blocking issues are going to be huge this year. I think that might prevent them from getting to that 8-8 mark you said. But I think they could win 4, 5, 6 games, maybe even 7. I think probably like 5-11, 6-10 is probably the most realistic spot because of their division stuff. If they were an easier division, I think 7-9. But yeah, I like the way the Bengals are trending right now.
Yeah, I think if I had to project a record for them right now, I'd go with 6-10, just because of the questions on the offensive line. Billy Price was mentioned by our commenters. He was replaced by Trey Hopkins last year as a starter. So I'm wondering if Price is going to be maybe a trade bait candidate if he can't improve, or maybe even potential cut. He's been a bust so far, and I agree with this. Hopefully, Bobby Hart can be kept on the bench. Bobby Hart is he is tough to watch at times out on the field. Maybe Hakeem Adeniji can play outside at the NFL level. A lot of people thought he needs to move to guard, but if Adeniji can't do it, I don't know exactly who on this Bengals team could knock off Hart. So definitely they have to improve that line moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. Let's get to the odds to win the division. So I mentioned the Ravens are minus 222. The other teams are the Steelers are plus 444. The Browns are plus 435, and the Bengals are plus 2450. So any thoughts on those?
I think they're all about right. I guess I might take a flyer on the Steelers just because I think that, if everything breaks right with Ben Roethlisberger, they could challenge the Ravens. But again, the Ravens are just such a well-built team, especially on defense, that it's kind of hard to bet against them. So I would only bet on the Steelers and Ravens here. I don't think the Browns have enough coaching clout to get it done, and I don't think the Bengals are quite ready to make that jump yet. Maybe in the second or third year of Joe Burrow's career they can do it, but so I probably will put a little bit on the Steelers, and I don't know if the value's good enough to bet on the Ravens, but I feel like if you bet on both of those sides, you're going to get the division winner.
Yeah, I think so. I think the Steelers plus 444 is okay. Like, not great, but I think I would be willing to bet a little bit on it, maybe like half a unit or something. So I think that's fine. Minus 222 is a little steep. Lamar Jackson goes down, that's over. Like, goodbye. So I think that that would prevent me from betting it if it was like minus 180, minus 175. I think I'd maybe consider it, but minus 222 is too expensive, I think. So we have a question about like how are the Bengals going to get to these 6 wins that we're talking about. So I'm looking at their schedule right now. I think they could beat the Chargers in week 1. They had the Jaguars at home in week 4. That seems like an easy win. Obviously, there's no easy win in the NFL, but the Jaguars are the worst team in the NFL. They have the Browns at home in week 7, which I think is possible. They have the Titans at home in week 8, and I think the Titans will decline this year. Not very much, but I think a little bit. At the Redskins, they can win there. They have home against the Giants in week 12. I like the Giants a lot, so I don't think that's an easy one, but it's definitely a possible win. Week 13 at the Dolphins, I think is a possible win. And I wouldn't sleep on them, beating the Cowboys at home in week 14. I think the Cowboys are overrated this year. I think that can happen. And then week 16 at the Texans, the Texans no longer have Hopkins, and Bill O'Brien could lose to anyone. So those are some wins that the Bengals could get this year.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember AFC North games are notoriously slugfests. None of them are easy. We saw Lamar Jackson put together a couple of blowouts last year, or actually the Ravens were involved in a blowout where the Browns blew them out one week, but they blew out the Bengals one week. I think that, the Bengals with a better looking defense should have a chance to stay in some of those games. So late in the season, like week 17 against Baltimore, if Baltimore doesn't need a win, they may rest starters there too, so they could potentially win that one depending on what the state of the league is at. And every other one that you're talking about makes sense too. I think Chargers, Jaguars, Redskins, Dolphins stand out as 4 that should be wins in my book. And then if they can win 2 of their division games, I don't think that's a stretch. I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think they win at least 1 division game, maybe 2. So I think that'll happen. All right, before we move on to the NFC North, I should say please hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or send this link out to anyone who might be interested in football and doesn't know about our podcast or website, or check out walterfootball.com for all the season previews.